The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 9, Apathy, where numbness becomes survival themes. Disconnection, detachment, burnout, learned helplessness includes depression, overstimulation, emotional fatigue, defensive withdrawal. So let's begin. I'm James. In this episode of The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, we explore the quiet survival of emotional shutdown when performance replaces presence, when safety looks like silence, and when the only way to stay afloat is to stop swimming. Apathy is rarely emptiness. More often, it's everything at once. Too much noise, too much feeling, too much pressure crashing into a nervous system that can't hold it all. So we disconnect, we detach, we go numb. Not because we don't care, but because caring has become too costly. The slow fade, first signs of numbness. There wasn't a single moment. It was a slow accumulation. I remember times in family dynamics, relationships, and jobs where enthusiasm would give way to disinterest. I wasn't broken, I was exhausted. I didn't hate the work, but the repetition, the marginalization, and the broken promises of growth wore me down. Over time, I became detached. The highs of hope and the lows of dismissal kept cycling until apathy became a form of equilibrium. I kept going out of necessity, not desire. I stayed present, but not alive. Psychological insight. Apathy is a hallmark of learned helplessness, a condition first identified by Martin Seligman, where repeated exposure to uncontrollable stress leads to passivity and disengagement. The nervous system begins to conserve energy by emotionally withdrawing, not as a failure of motivation, but as a survival strategy. Reference: Seligman, MEP 1975, Learned Helplessness, on Depression, Development, and Death Insight Prompt. Numbness is not the absence of feeling, it's the body's signal that it has felt too much for too long. Self-reflection prompt. What part of your life once felt meaningful but now feels muted? Theory in action prompt. Track your emotional energy over a week. Where does it fade and where does it feel replenished? Protective freeze or emotional paralysis. After the breakdown of my marriage, I hit a wall. I woke one day, turned to my mum later that morning, and said, I can't do this anymore. The overwhelm was physical, emotional, and consuming. Work was crumbling under corporate changes. My health was ignored. I shut down fully. My focus, sleep, appetite, and motivation all gone. Even seeking a diagnosis for autism, ADHD, and bipolar, I was dismissed by my employer when asking for reasonable adjustments. So I left. Not because I gave up, but because I couldn't keep surviving inside a system that refused to see me. Psychological insight. When the nervous system is overwhelmed beyond capacity, it can enter a freeze response, part of the fight-flight-freeze-fawn trauma model. Unlike depression, which often includes sadness, freeze is characterized by emotional flatness, dissociation, and an inability to act. Reference: Van der Kolk, B. 2014, The Body Keeps the Score Insight Prompt. Emotional shutdown is often intelligence in disguise, our body choosing survival over performance. Self-reflection prompt. What's one time you judged yourself as lazy or weak when you were shutting down to survive? Theory in action prompt. Revisit your stress timeline. When did numbness replace anxiety? What triggered that shift? The burnout behind the blankness. I've been with people who drained me, not maliciously, but relentlessly. The codependency became smothering. I needed space. They needed constant closeness. When I finally withdrew, I was punished, ignored, insulted, or manipulated. Eventually, I felt nothing, no frustration, no anger, no desire, just blankness. The push-pull wore down every nerve. Psychological insight. Burnout is more than exhaustion. It's the erosion of empathy, identity, and motivation due to chronic emotional demand, especially in enmeshed or codependent dynamics. Burnout manifests as emotional numbness, irritability, and disconnection from one's own needs. Reference: Maslach, C. and Leiter, MP 1997. Teehee Truth About Burnout Insight Prompt. Burnout isn't just depletion. It's a form of emotional self-protection. Self-reflection prompt. When have you cared so much for so long that you stopped caring altogether? Teehee in action prompt. Identify one relationship or activity where your presence is performative. What would happen if you stepped back? When even joy feels heavy. Sometimes I couldn't tell if I was happy, sad, or anything at all. The ability to connect with joy, intimacy, and even creativity, gone. Not because I didn't want to feel, but because I didn't know how. There was an emotional block that built walls between me and my experience. I knew I was dissociating, but I didn't yet know how to come back. Psychological insight. Emotional blunting is common in trauma and chronic stress responses. Overstimulation leads to shutdown in the limbic system, limiting access to both negative and positive effect. Joy, intimacy, and creativity require emotional safety, which becomes unavailable in survival mode. Reference: Porges, S. 2011, Teehee Polyvagal Theory Insight Prompt. Disconnection from joy is often a symptom of overwhelm, not apathy. S. Elf Reflection Prompt. When have you gone through the motions of joy without actually feeling it? Teehee in Action Prompt. Create one small, no-pressure space this week to explore pleasure or creativity, even if it feels awkward at first. Defensive withdrawal as a coping mechanism. I've had to withdraw, not out of depression, but to survive overstimulation. I was labeled flaky, unserious, or unstable. The truth is, I was dealing with someone who couldn't respect my limits and who spun false narratives when I pulled back. I wasn't avoiding them, I was protecting myself. I gave time, presence, honesty, and patience. Be it was never enough. Eventually, it became nothing at all. Psychological insight. Defensive withdrawal is a protective behavior, a way to aim emotional space in the face of invasion, instability, or overexposure. It's often misread as avoidance or apathy, especially by those who are emotionally dependent or controlling. Our reference, Lihan MM 1993. See Cognitive Behavioral Treatment of Borderline Personality Disorder Insight Prompt. Sometimes self-preservation looks like disappearing, but it's reclaiming your nervous system. Self-reflection prompt. When have you been wrongly blamed for walking away when you were walking back to yourself? Teehee in Action prompt. Set a boundary before you're overstimulated, not after. Ot is how it changes the interaction. Depression versus detachment. There's a difference between depression and detachment. One sinks you, the other floats you at a distance. I've been in relationships where detachment wasn't the result of sadness, but of survival. I couldn't meet constant need with constant energy. The pressure to perform, fix, or attend became impossible. I didn't collapse, I escaped, and there's a difference. Psychological insight. Depression is marked by pervasive sadness, fatigue, and lack of hope. Detachment, often confused with depression, is a more strategic nervous system adaptation to chronic emotional threat. The distinction is crucial for recovery and self-compassion. Reference: Laziness R. et al. 2010. The Impact of Early Life Trauma on Health and Disease Insight Prompt. You weren't always depressed. Sometimes you were just done pretending to be okay. Self-reflection prompt. Can you now look back and see where emotional withdrawal saved you from collapse? Theory in Action prompt. When you feel numb, ask, is this detachment or a call for safety? The return, reconnecting without overexposing. I've learned to reconnect without burning out. It starts with knowing myself emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Shadow work, breath work, simplicity. Nature, stillness. I don't let myself get to the edge anymore. I adjusted earlier. I'm more open with people. I say I'm not up for that today. I honor my needs without guilt. I don't justify, I don't over-explain. My time is sacred. My nervous system is sacred. And if others can't meet me with respect, I simply let go. Psychological insight. Healing from apathy involves re-regulating the nervous system and reclaiming agency. Polyvagal-informed therapy and somatic practices teach us to move from a dissociated state back into connection, without returning to performance or self-sacrifice. Reference: Ogden P. Minton K. and Payne, C. 2006. Trauma and the Body. A sensorimotor approach to psychotherapy insight prompt. Reconnection doesn't require re-exposure. You can return gently on your terms. Self-reflection prompt. What does connection feel like without pressure, guilt, or urgency? Theory in Action prompt. Create a nervous system contract with yourself, a promise of what you won't tolerate, even from people you love. The wisdom of numbness apathy isn't emptiness. It's full, it's heavy, it's the final act of a nervous system begging to be left alone. If you've gone numb, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're smart. You learned to survive in a world that demanded too much. But you're allowed to come back to yourself, to joy, to softness. Not all at once, not to please anyone, but because your body deserves peace. When numbness becomes survival, healing becomes resistance. And that resistance, that's your return. This has been the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. If this episode stirred something in you, curiosity, reflection, or even discomfort, sit with it. Let it speak. That's where your growth begins. Until next time, stay grounded, stay honest, and keep walking toward the truth that's yours to live. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse. A journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within Traces, Food Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.